Section 5 of Caroline the Illustrious, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is Chromium Jade, Caroline the Illustrious, by William Henry Wilkins. Chapter 5. Caroline's First Regency, 1729. In May 1729, the king, who had been for some time anxious to visit his Hanoverian dominions, which he had not seen since 1714, got a short act passed through Parliament, appointing the Queen to act as regent in his absence. The king's visit to Hanover was very unpopular with his English subjects, who had hoped they had heard the last of these journeys when George I died. As Prince of Wales, George II had always declared that he loved England far better than Hanover, but this was only in opposition to his father, and soon after he ascended the throne, he avowed himself strongly Hanoverian in his tastes, and found fault with everything in England. In this mood, the best thing for him to do was to return to his own country for a time, and Walpole no doubt was glad to get him out of the way, while the Queen eagerly grasped at the authority which the deed of the regency granted her. But she showed none of this eagerness to the king, and when he announced his intention of leaving England, she deplored his absence with tears, and received his commission on her knees with all due humility. The king gave the royal assent to the act of regency on May 14th, and 3 days later he set out for Hanover, accompanied by a numerous retinue, and Lord Townshend as minister in attendance. The Queen appointed the Speaker of the House of Commons, Onslow, to be her chancellor during her regency and keeper of the Great Seal. She held her first council as regent 5 days after the king left. It was reported in the London Gazette as follows. At the court at Kensington on the 22nd day of May, 1729. Present. The Queen's most excellent Majesty, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Chancellor, Lord Privy Seal, Lord Steward, Lord Chamberlain, Duke of Somerset, Duke of Bolton, Duke of Rutland, Duke of Argyll, Duke of Montrose, Duke of Kent, Duke of Ancaster, Duke of Newcastle, Earl of Westmoreland, Earl of Burlington, Earl of Scarborough, Earl of Coventry, Earl of Grantham, Earl of Godolphin, Earl of Loudon, Earl of Findlater, Earl of Marchmont, Earl of Islay, Earl of Uxbridge, Earl of Sussex, Viscount Lonsdale, Viscount Cobham, Viscount Falmouth, Lord Wilmington, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Master of the Rolls, Sir Paul Methuen, and Henry Pelham, Esquire. The King's commission appointing Her Most Excellent Majesty, the Queen-Regent over this kingdom, by the style and title of Guardian of the Kingdom of Great Britain, and His Majesty's Lieutenant within the same during His Majesty's absence, was this day by Her Majesty's command opened and read in His Majesty's most honourable Privy Council, after which His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and all the lords and others of the council who were present, had the honour to kiss Her Majesty's hand. Caroline entered with manifest enjoyment upon the duties of her office, and discharged them with great ability. She had so long known the essence of power that it was easy for her to adapt herself to its outward manifestation. Townshend, who was jealous of Walpole's favour with the Queen, endeavoured to induce the king to modify her powers as regent, and urged him to send a dispatch to that effect from The Hague. But the king, though he listened, declined to do so. In fact, he knew better than anyone else that his interests were safe in his consort's hands. The Queen-Regent had the power of opening and proroguing Parliament, signifying the royal assent to acts and measures, appointing bishops, and of making other important appointments. She also received the foreign ambassadors and envoys as though she were the king, and corresponded with foreign sovereigns. Queen Caroline was especially careful to cultivate and strengthen the good understanding between England and France, and she wrote several letters to the King of France and sent him a present of a dozen hogsheads of perry and cider. The most important negotiation in foreign affairs was the Treaty of Seville, which was practically concluded during Caroline's regency, though it was not signed until a little later, November 9th, 1729. This treaty terminated the long dispute between England and Spain. By its provisions, English trade to America, which had been interrupted, was restored. England was given back all that Spain had captured during the war, and the Asiento Treaty, or contract for supplying Negroes, of establishing certain factories, and of sending one ship to the South Sea, was confirmed to the South Sea Company. But the most important feature of the treaty was that Gibraltar was tacitly relinquished by Spain. It would have been too much to claim for Caroline the credit of the cession of Gibraltar to England, but there is no doubt that her wise and temperate counsels, and her anxiety not to give needless offense to Spanish susceptibilities by mentioning the fortress by name, materially aided William Stanhope, the English plenipotentiary at Madrid, in conducting the difficult and delicate negotiations which resulted in the Treaty of Seville. Gibraltar was a question which touched Spanish pride very nearly, and to see a fortress on its own shores, held and garrisoned by England, was as great a humiliation to Spain as England's possession of Calais had once been to France. Time had been, and not so long before, when English ministers advised the recession of Gibraltar to Spain, and George I had written a letter which contained a promise to restore the fortress at some future time. This letter had been written upon the advice of Townshend and Carteret in 1721, and so lately as 1728, we find that Townshend was still in favor of the cession of Gibraltar. Writing to points, he declared, "What you proposed in relation to Gibraltar is certainly very reasonable, and is exactly conformable to the opinion which you know I have always entertained concerning that place. But you cannot but be sensible of the violent and almost superstitious zeal which has of late prevailed among all parties of this kingdom against any scheme for the restitution of Gibraltar upon any conditions whatsoever." If the matter had rested with Townshend, who had obtained the ear of the king during his absence at Hanover, Gibraltar would probably have been ceded to Spain. To Caroline, therefore, acting in conjunction with Walpole, the credit is due of having retained it for England. True, Gibraltar was not mentioned by name in the Treaty of Seville, though the opposition clamored for its explicit mention. But the Queen and the Prime Minister were firm. They were content with the kernel and not troubled about the husk. The result justified their wisdom. The treaty was ultimately ratified without conditions, and Gibraltar henceforth became a recognized possession of England. In this, as in all other matters, the Queen worked in close accord with Walpole, and by showing the opposition how little she heeded their attacks, she publicly marked her favor of the Prime Minister by going to dine with him, accompanied by the Prince of Wales and all the royal family at his house at Chelsea, where a magnificent entertainment was provided for Her Majesty. The Queen and the royal family dined in one room, and the rest of the party in another, Walpole himself waiting on his illustrious guest. Nor did the Queen neglect the ceremonial side of her office. She kept great state while she was at St. James's, and on the anniversary, June 11th, of the King's accession, she held court at St. James's, which was one of the most largely attended of the reign. She also frequently honored the nobility with her presence at their entertainments. At Windsor, Caroline kept much company, availing herself of the King's absence to go there. At Windsor she felt Queen of England indeed. She occupied the rooms which had been used by the late Queen Anne, and her favorite sitting room was the closet wherein Anne first heard of the great victory of Blenheim, in which hung the banner annually presented by the Duke of Marlborough, and now by his daughter, who was Duchess in her own right. Caroline held drawing-rooms in the state apartments, of which the finest were the magnificent St. George's Hall and the ballroom, hung with tapestry representing the seasons of the year. The celebrated collection of beauties by Sir Peter Lely, afterwards removed to Hampton Court, adorned one of the state apartments, and the private chapel had some exquisite carved work by Grinling Gibbons. Here Caroline attended divine service, and seated in the royal closet hung with crimson velvet, listened to lengthy discourses from Dr. Samuel Clarke or some other favorite divine. It was from Windsor, on a notable occasion, that she drove to honor the Earl and Countess of Orkney with a visit to their beautiful seat at Cliveden. Yesterday, writes Peter Wentworth, the Queen and all the royal family went to dine and supper at Cliveden. How they were diverted I know not, but I believe very well, for they did not come home until almost 4 in the morning. According to all accounts, the entertainment was very successful, but Lady Orkney's anxieties as a hostess seemed to have weighed heavily upon her, for we find her writing a long letter a few days later to Mrs. Howard, expressing her anguish because some little things had gone wrong. Perhaps Lady Orkney only wanted a more particular expression of the Queen's satisfaction. Her letter may be quoted as an expression of the fulsome servility to royal personages then in vogue even among the high nobility. Cliveden, August 5, 1729. Madam, I give you this trouble out of the anguish of my mind, to have the Queen doing us the honor to dine here, and nothing performed in the order it ought to have been. The stools which were set for the royal family, though distinguished from ours, which I thought was right, because the Princess Royal sits so at quadrille, put away by Lord Grantham, who said there was to be no distinction from prince and princesses and the ladies. He directed the tablecloth so that there may be 2 to cover the table, for he used to have it so. In short, turned the servants' heads. They kept back the dinner too long for Her Majesty after it was dished, and was set before the fire, and made it look not well dressed, the Duke of Grafton saying they wanted a maître d'hôtel. All this vexed my Lord Orkney so. He tells me he hopes I will never meddle more, if he could ever hope for the same honor, which I own I did too much, as I see by the success, but having it done for the late king, and was told that things were in that order, that it was as if his Majesty had lived here. I ventured it now, but I have promised not to aim at it more. But what I have said shows the great goodness in the Queen to be so very easy. I have seen condescension in princesses, but none that ever came up to Her Majesty. Nay, not all the good you have ever said could make me imagine what I saw and heard. We all agreed Her Majesty must be admired, and if I may use the term, it was impossible to see her and not love her. If you hear of these mismanagements, pray be so good as to say the house was too little for the reception of the Queen, and so many great prince and princesses, who without flattery cannot be but respectedly admired. I thought I had turned my mind in a philosophical way of having done with the world, but I find I have deceived myself, for I am vexed and pleased with the honors I have received. I know from your discretion you will burn this, and I hope will always believe me, etc. E. Orkney. From Windsor the Queen returned to Kensington, which she made her headquarters for the rest of the summer, paying visits occasionally to Hampton Court, Richmond, and Windsor for the purpose of hunting. The best idea of the social side of her regency may be gathered from letters that Peter Wentworth wrote during this period to Lord Strafford. They throw curious sidelights on the manners of the time. To quote seriatim, Kensington, July 25th, 1729. I have been at Richmond again with the Queen and the royal family, and I thank God they are all very well. We are to go there today, and the Queen walks about there all day long. I shall be no more her just as a lover of drink at free cost, not only from her own observations of one whom she sees every morning at 8 o'clock, and in the evening again at 7, walking in the gardens, and in the drawing-room till after 10, but because she has my Lord Lifford to play upon, who this day se'night got drunk at Richmond. His manner of getting so was pleasant enough. He dined with my good Lord Grantham, who is well served at his table with meat, but very stingy and sparing in his drink, for as soon as his dinner is done, he and his company rise, and no more round of toasts. So my lord made good use of his time whilst at dinner, and before they rose the Prince of Wales came to them, and drank a bon père to my Lord Lifford, which he pledged, and began another to him, and so a third. The Duke of Grantham, to show the prince he had done his business, gave him, Lord Lifford, a little shove, and threw him off his chair upon the ground, and then took him up and carried him to the Queen. Sunday morning she railed at him before all the court upon getting drunk in her company, and upon his gallantry and coquetry with Princess Amelia, running up and down the stairs with her. When somebody told him the Queen was there and saw him, his answer was, "What do I care for the Queen?" He stood all her jokes, not only with French impudence, but with Irish assurance. For all you say, I don't wonder I blushed for him, and wished for half his stock. I wonder at her making it so public. Nobody has made a song. If Mr. Hamilton will make one that shall praise the Queen and the royal family's good humour, and expose as much as he pleases the folly of Lord Grantham and Lord Lifford, I will show it to the Prince, and I know he won't tell whom he had it from, for I have lately obliged him with the sight of Mrs. Fitzwilliam's litany, and he has promised he will not say he had it from me. So I must beg you to say nothing of this to Lady Strafford, for she will write it for news to Lady Charlotte Russey, and then I shall have Mrs. Fitz angry with me, and the Prince laughing at me for not being able to keep my own counsellor, as I fear you laugh now. But if you betray me, I make a solemn vow I will never tell you anything again. The Queen continues very kind and obliging in her sayings to me, and gave me the other day an opportunity to tell her of my circumstances. As we were driving by Chelsea, she asked me what that walled place was called. I told her Chelsea Park, and in the time of the bubbles 'twas designed for the silkworms. She asked me if I was not in the bubbles. With a sigh I answered, yes, that, and my fire had made me worse than nothing. Some time after, when I did not think she saw me, I was biting my nails. She called to me and said, "Oh, fie, Mr. Wentworth, you bite your nails so very prettily." I begged her pardon for doing so in her presence, but said I did it for vexation of my circumstances, and to save a crown from Dr. Lamb for cutting them. She said she was sorry I had anything to vex me, and I did well to save my money. The Prince told her I was one of the most diligent servants he ever saw. I bowed and smiled as if I thought he bantered me. He understood me, and therefore repeated again that he meant it seriously, and upon his word he thought that the Queen was happy in having so good a servant. I told him 'twas a great satisfaction to me to meet with his Royal Highness's approbation. He clapped his hand upon my shoulder and assured me that I had it. As we went to Richmond last Wednesday, our grooms had a battle with a carter that would not go out of the way. The good Queen had compassion for the rascal, and ordered me to ride after him and give him a crown. I desired Her Majesty to recall that order, for the fellow was a very saucy fellow, and I saw him strike the Prince's groom first, and if we gave him anything for his beating, 'twould be an example to others to stop the way a purpose to provoke a beating. The Prince approved what I said, for he had said much the same to her in Dutch, and I got immortal fame amongst the liverymen, who are no small fools at this court. I told her if she would give the crown to anybody, it should be to the Prince's groom, who had the carter's long whip over his shoulder. She laughed, but saved her crown. Kensington, August 14th, 1729. The Queen had done me the honour to refer me for my orders to Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, and what is agreed by her will please Her Majesty. The height of my ambition is to please them all. I flatter myself I have done so hitherto, for Princess Anne has distinguished me with a singular mark of her favour, for she has made me a present of hunting suit of clothes, which is blue, trimmed with gold, and faced and lined with red. The Prince of Wales, Princess Anne, the Duke of Cumberland, Princess Mary, and Princess Louisa wear the same, and look charming pretty in them. Thursday se'nnight Windsor Forest will be blessed with their presence again, and since the forest was a forest, it had never had such a fine set of hunters, for a world of gentlemen have had the ambition to follow His Royal Highness's fashion. On Sunday last at Richmond Park, Major Sylvain made his appearance by the Queen's chaise, and she did him the honour to take notice of him, telling him she was glad to see he could hunt. He thought to be witty upon me, but telling Her Majesty I took such delight in waiting that he thought it a pity to deprive me of that pleasure. My good and gracious Queen assured him to my satisfaction, and to his mortification, for she said, "Does he? So 'tis a sign he loves me, and I love them the better for it." He replied he hoped Her Majesty did not think the worse of him. She had the goodness to say no, but repeated again that she loved me the better. Princess Amelia, who was in the chaise with her, turned her head from Sylvain and smiled most graciously upon me, which I could answer in no other way than by low bows to mark the sense of the great honour that was done me. And for my life I could not forbear getting behind the chaise to triumph over and insult the Major, telling him he had got much by being witty upon me, which Princess Amelia heard and laughed again upon me. Kensington, August 21st, 1729. Yesterday the Queen and all the royal family dined at Claremont, and I dined with the Duke of Newcastle and Sir Robert Walpole, etc. The Prince of Wales came to us as his and our dinner was over, and drank a bumper of rack punch to the Queen's health, which you may be sure I devotedly pledged, and he was going on with another, but Her Majesty sent us word that she was going to walk in the garden, so that broke up the company. We walked till candlelight, being entertained with very fine French horns, then returned to the great hall, and everybody agreed never was anything finer lit. Her Majesty and Princess Caroline, Lady Charlotte Russe and Mr. Schutz played their quadrille. In the next room the prince had the fiddles and danced, and he did me the honour to ask me if I could dance a country dance. I told him yes, and if there had been a partner for me, I should have made one in that glorious company. The Prince with the Duchess of Newcastle, the Duke of Newcastle with Princess Anne, the Duke of Grafton with Princess Amelia, Sir Robert Walpole with Lady Catherine Pelham, who was with child, so they danced but 2 dances. The Queen came from her cards to see that sight, and before she said it, I thought that he, Sir Robert Walpole, moved surprisingly genteelly, and his dancing really became him, which I should not have believed if I had not seen, and if you please, you may suspend your belief until you see the same. Lord Lifford danced with Lady Fanny Manners, and when they came to an easy dance, my dear Duke took her from my lord, and I must confess it became him better than the man I wished to be my friend, Sir Robert, which you will easily believe. Mr. Henry Pelham danced with Lady Albemarle, Lord James Cavendish with Lady Middleton, and Mr. Lumley with Betty Spence. I paid my court sometimes to the carders, and sometimes to the dancers. The Queen told Lord Lifford that he had not drunk enough to make him gay, and there is honest Mr. Wentworth has not drunk enough. I told her I had drunk Her Majesty's health, and my children's too, I hope? I answered yes. But she told me there was one health I had forgot, which was the Duke and Duchess of Newcastle's, who had entertained us so well. I told her I had been down among the coachmen to see that they had obeyed my orders to keep themselves sober, and I had had them all by the hand, and could witness for them that they were so, and it would not have been decent for me to examine them about it without I had kept myself sober. But now the grand duty was over. I was at leisure to obey Her Majesty's commands. There stood at the farther end of the room a table with bottles of wine for the dancers to drink, and I went and filled a bumper of Burgundy and drank the Duke's and Duchess' health to Mr. Lumley, and I told him I did it by Her Majesty's command. And then I went to the dancers, and he to the Queen, and told her I had done so. When I came to her again, she told me she was glad I had obeyed her commands, and I thanked Mr. Lumley for the justice he had done me in telling it to the Queen, which drew this compliment from him, that he should always be ready to do me justice, or any service in his power. I beg my son may have no occasion to grieve that I have now and again taken a glass too much, for in my cups I shall call upon Mr. Lumley to remember me, and 'tis through these merry companions, or through rich friends, that services are done for people. The Queen and the Prince have invited themselves to the Duke of Grafton's hunting seat, which lies near Richmond, Saturday. He fended off for a great while, saying his house was not fit to receive them, and 'twas so old he was afraid 'twould fall upon their heads. But his Royal Highness, who was very quick at good inventions, told him he would bring tents and pitch them in his garden, so his Grace's excuse did not come off. The thing must be Saturday. I have sent you enclosed a copy of my letter I wrote to Lord Pomfret, which will explain to you how I am made secretary to the Queen, and before dinner, under pretence to know if I had taken Her Majesty's sense aright, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, being by when I received the orders, I desire leave to show it her. She smiled and said, by all means let me see it. She kept it till she had dined, read it to the Queen, her brothers and sisters, and then sent for me from the gentleman's usher's table, and gave it to me, again thanked me, and said it was very well writ, and she saw too that I could dine at that table without being drunk at free cost. Kensington, September 2nd, 1729. Yesterday, when the Queen was just got into her chaise, there came a messenger who brought her a packet of letters from the King, with the good news that His Majesty was very well. He had left him at the play this day se'night. It also said that the Guards of Hanover were not to march, for all the differences were accommodated between the King and the King of Prussia, so that I hope now the match will go forward, and that we will soon have the King here. The Queen opened the letter and read it as she went along. The Princess Anne and the Duke of Cumberland were riding on before, and neither saw nor heard anything of this. Therefore I scoured away from the Queen to tell them the good news, and then I rode back and told the Queen what I had done, and that I had pleasure to be the messenger of good news. She and they thanked me and commended what I had done. I have sent you a copy of the orders I have been given today, that you may see we go in for continual round of pleasure. Kensington, September 16th, 1729. There was one Mr. Wentworth who had a very agreeable present from the Queen. As he went over with her in the ferry boat Saturday se'night, she gave a purse to Princess Anne, and bade her give it to Mr. Wentworth. Then she told him she wished him good luck, and in order that she may bring it to him, she had given him silver and gold, a sixpence, a shilling, and a half-guinea. He took the purse, gave Her Majesty a great many thanks. What, she said, will you not look into it? His answer was, whatever comes from your Majesty is agreeable to him, though if he had not felt in the purse some paper, he could not have taken the royal jest with so good a grace. There was a bank bill in it, which raised such a contention between him and his wife that in a manner he had better never had it. He was willing to give her half, but the good wife called in worthy Madame Perquet to her assistance, and she demanded to give a third to her. All this was told the Queen the next day, and caused a great laugh, but poor Mr. Wentworth, upon the thought of soliciting the great Lord Lifford for a sum of £15 he had forgotten to pay him in the South Sea. When the chase was over, the Prince clapped Mr. Wentworth on the back and wished him joy of his present, and told him now he would never be without money in his pocket. He replied if His Highness had not told him so publicly of it, it might have been so, but now his creditors would tease every farthing from him. The King, who had been at Hanover 5 months now, made ready to return to England. He had greatly enjoyed his visit to the electorate, and had given several fêtes, including a farewell masquerade in the gardens of Herrenhausen, where the hedges of clipped hornsbeam acted as screens and the grass as carpet. The whole scene was illuminated by colored lights. The King followed at Hanover the same clockwork rule he had established in England. Our life is as uniform as that of a monastery, wrote one of the King's English retinue who was lodged at the Leinschloss. Every morning at 11, and every evening at 6, we drive into the heat to Herrenhausen through an enormous linden avenue, and twice a day cover our coats and coaches with dust. In the King's society there is never the least change. At table and at cards, he always sees the same faces, and at the end of the game retires into his chamber. Twice a week there is a French theatre. The other days there is a play in the gallery. In this way, were the King to always stop in Hanover, One could take a 10 years calendar of his proceedings and settle beforehand what time of business, meals, and pleasure would be. It was during this visit of George II to Hanover that his dispute with the King of Prussia came to a crisis. The King of England resented the King of Prussia's connivance at his son Frederick's disobedience, but he could hardly make that the ostensible pretext for a quarrel. So he raked up the old grievance of the Prussians having kidnapped some of his tall Hanoverians for the Potsdam regiment of guards. And so violent grew the altercation, and so insulting were the messages of the King of Prussia, that the choleric little George sent him word challenging him to single combat at any place he would name, and leaving him the choice of weapons. It would have been a boon to Europe in general, and to England and Prussia in particular, if these two royal combatants had met and killed one another as they threatened to do. But unfortunately, such a desirable consummation was prevented by Lord Townshend, whose remonstrances resulted in a compromise being patched up between the illustrious cousins. In fact, so amicably were matters settled that the pretended negotiations again were set on foot for the marriage of the Prince of Wales with Wilhelmina. The prince professed himself most eager for the match, and wrote to Hotham, the special envoy at Berlin, "Please, dear Hotham, get my marriage settled. My impatience increases daily, for I am quite foolishly in love." Wilhelmina, however, says that she did not credit these romantic sentiments, and she thought they were due rather to obstinacy than love. Her father was quite indifferent as to whether the Prince of Wales' desire to wed his daughter proceeded from love or obstinacy. All he wished was that Wilhelmina should be taken off his hands and given a suitable establishment. King George had the same feeling about Amelia, who he still desired to marry the crown prince. The King of Prussia's answer to this was, "I will agree to my son's marriage if he is made regent of Hanover and allowed to direct the management of the electorate till my death, and if provision is made for his maintenance." These terms, of course, were impossible, and the matter came to an end. The king quitted Hanover with regret, and commanded that everything should remain at Herrenhausen precisely the same as when he was there. The pomp and circumstance of the electoral court suffered no abatement in his absence. The splendid stables containing 800 horses were maintained at their full strength, and the chamberlains, court-martials, and others continued to receive their full salaries. The king appointed no regent over the electorate in his absence. His uncle, the Duke of York, was dead, and his son, the Prince of Wales, was now in England, so he placed the government of the electorate in the hands of a council of regency, and as a substitute for his own most gracious presence at the levees, the king portrait as elector was placed upon the vacant throne in the stateroom at Herrenhausen. Every Saturday a levee was held as though the elector, for they did not officially recognize the King of England at Hanover, had been there, and the courtiers assembled and made their bow to the picture on the chair of state, just as though it had been the elector himself. This absurd ceremony continued through George II's reign, except when he was at Hanover. The king landed at Margate on September 11th, and at once posted to London, where his queen and regent were eagerly expecting him. So anxious was she that when the outriders came on ahead to Kensington Palace to announce that the king was nearing London, the queen set out on foot, accompanied by all her children, and walked from Kensington through Hyde Park, down Piccadilly to St. James's Park, where she met the king's coach. The king stopped, alighted, and heartily embraced his consort in the sight of all the people. Then he helped her back into the coach, when they drove off to Kensington together amid the cheers of the populace, followed by the other coaches containing the king's suite and the princes and princesses. The devotion which the queen showed the king and the evident affection he bore her are the best features, one might almost say the only good features, of the court of England at this period. Peter Wentworth, who writes to his brother of this royal meeting, says, "The king is happily arrived. You see, I am got into the prince by the honor of the queen did me, alone of all her servants, to send me to meet the king. I was the only gentleman's servant with her when she walked, Monday se'nnight, with all her royal children, from Kensington Gardens, quite to the island of St. James's Park. Passages there are better told than writ, which I design myself the honor to do very soon, though I find virtue retires no more to cottages and cells, but secure of public triumph and applause, she makes the British court her imperial residence. The next day, at the meeting of the Privy Council, the Queen, kneeling, delivered her commission of regency back into the King's hands and rendered him an account of her stewardship. End of section 5, read by Chromium Jade in Wellington, New Zealand, September 29th, 2024.